Disasters are not natural. That very provocative statement made by Terry Cannon in his excellent chapter on vulnerability analysis is designed to get you thinking at the start of this online learning module. We want you to think beyond simply the nature and causes of natural hazards. Of course, as a disaster manager, you should continue to develop a good understanding of the physical forces at work with natural hazards. And that's why during your talk module we'll explain the different geological and meteorological phenomena underlying various types of natural hazards that might be typically included within national disaster management plans around the world. And we give examples of case studies and the lessons that were identified from these events. But now we want to deepen your understanding by thinking thematically about natural hazards. And we'll start with vulnerability. Here you'll examine the argument that it's the decisions, actions and lifestyles of people, and not merely physical forces, that are the principal cause of risks and disasters. The world is becoming more urbanized, societies are becoming more complex, and we are becoming increasingly reliant upon technology that is itself vulnerable to the effects of cascading events that arise from these natural hazards. Added onto this, of course, are the challenges of global warming and climate change. Vulnerability is equally an issue of perception and a capacity to adapt. The journey from public ignorance of risk through to a resilient view of actual exposure to risk filters through many layers of perception. In some countries, the ignorance of risk may even be the result of a deliberate political decision not to worry the public with talk of risk and hazards, as this could imply dangers facing the communities that the government might be seen as incapable of dealing with. Well, such a paternal approach towards risk reveals a political desire to be seen as highly competent and in charge. Other filters can be cultural, religious and social. All of these can be played upon and exacerbated by the media. So whilst a Category 3 or 4 hurricane in New Orleans may have been regarded as a major item of the National Risk Register of the United States prior to the attack on the Twin Towers on the 11th of September 2001, the perception of that risk as a national priority was significantly altered after 9/11. Perceptions of vulnerability from terrorism, filtered and perpetuated by the media, politicians, other key commentators, that prevailed over the science that pointed towards the risk of flooding in New Orleans, right up to the moment that Hurricane Katrina hit the coast of Louisiana. Now, another theme we'll pick up on is early warning. And this is a key aspect of risk reduction and response, and one which tests the ability of the scientific community, the politicians and emergency responders to work together. So early warning implies the idea of experts who advise decision makers, who in turn authorize responders. But who is the expert? Scientists? Engineers? Civil protection officers? Government civil servants? Or even the local population? And what levels of trust have been built up? What roles and responsibilities, and most importantly of all, what systems do we have for reliable communication to affected stakeholders as to what the risk might be, what actions should be taken, and how we monitor public response? Now, the United Nations defines an early warning system as the provision of timely and effective information through identifying institutions that allow individuals exposed to a hazard to act to avoid or reduce their risk and prepare an effective response. So warning systems need clear indicators. These indicators need monitoring. And when indicators point to an imminent risk, then a warning needs to be communicated, received by everyone affected, and believed before being acted upon. And this is actually a highly complex process. Some hazards are impossible to predict. Often it's difficult to say with certainty what the hazards will do. Political leaders have been known to evacuate populations away from the path of a predicted cyclone, only to discover that they evacuated them into the new path of the cyclone. So we need to consider issues such as public education, community knowledge of what to do, and most important of all, practice. Something that no community likes to do unless they've been recently on the wrong end of a major natural hazard. Now, writers and commentators on early warning systems point to a number of challenges. First, there's a lack of political commitment to develop early warning systems. And often this is a result of an inadequate understanding of the links between risk reduction and development. So as a result, a lack of financial and political investment is made in early warning. And this frustrates what the UN ISDR is seeking to champion, which is a national, people-centred early warning system in every country. In addition, there is insufficient coordination amongst the various actors involved in early warning systems. They simply don't talk to each other. And these may be across government institutions or national boundaries between neighbour countries. Natural hazards do not respect national borders. Now, we also want you to examine the successes and failures of the Sendai framework of 2015, which picked up from where the Hyogo framework left off. So woven throughout David's presentation on Sendai, and indeed each of his other presentations in this module, is the subject of resilience. Resilience really is the mirror image of vulnerability, and Professor David Alexander addresses some uncomfortable truths about national governance and resilience. He identifies corruption, negligence, apathy, lack of engagement, and lack of communication amongst the many problems facing the implementation of Sendai. Does Sendai go far enough? Is the framework even necessary? Shouldn't governments be making sure that their communities and infrastructure are resilient anyway? Do we really need an international framework telling nations what to do? And remember, resilience is more than just an engineering term to measure how able you are to absorb a shock and recover. Resilience is also the power to adapt to new situations and to remove yourself from harm's way. Plenty to think about when we're studying resilience and Sendai. And then finally, there's the subject of cascading disasters. And in this section, we encourage you to examine the wider consequences within a given scenario. Cascading disasters are, if you like, similar to a set of falling dominoes. One knocks another, which knocks another, and so on. And cascading disasters reveal compound and interconnected risks and exacerbate linked physical and social vulnerabilities. Now, an obvious example of this is the 2011 Japanese earthquake, which triggered a tsunami, which in turn triggered a nuclear disaster. But consider also the electricity grid failure on the eastern seaboard of the United States in 2003. Electricity failure led to sewage and water failure, which in turn led to health issues. And there was a lack of electricity also affected communications, refrigeration, banking failures, food and fuel supplies, and of course transport. A network of failures, if you like, all of which impact on a society that is seeking to respond to and recover from what the media are still calling a natural disaster. Have we become over-reliant on technology? Do we continue to believe that engineering will answer all of our future risks of natural disasters? Can we continue to ignore affected communities when developing our risk reduction strategies? And why do we always forget the most vulnerable? I can offer you, however, one certainty for this particular CPD. There will almost always be an up-to-date example of a natural disaster for you to examine somewhere in the world whilst you're studying this module. And even as we record this video, major hurricanes are shaping up around the world. I hope you enjoy studying the management of natural disasters and preparing for your assignments. Good luck.